Believe it or not, I found 20 absolutely stunning movies included with Prime Video. In this video, we're going to talk about 20 from a wide range of genres, including some over-the-top action movies, some of the most beautiful art films I've ever seen. There's an anime movie on the list, an incredible documentary, a western, and a lot more. This video is sponsored by Babbel, but I'll tell you more about them in a little bit. First, let's talk about my number 20 pick, BAYTOWN Outlaws. Now, being my number 20 pick, this also happens to be one of the worst reviewed movies on this list, but that's because it's a silly, low-budget action movie with some really grungy redneck characters. Eva Longoria stars in this, and Billy Bob Thornton. I actually watch a lot of movies in this genre, in this budget range, and they are often not very good at all, and BAYTOWN Outlaws actually stands out as an exceptional one, but that doesn't mean it's a great movie. It's just kind of a fun, wild watch, and for a movie like this, they got some pretty amazing shots as well, which is why it makes this particular list. Now, my number 19 pick is easily one of the most stunning movies on a list full of some beautiful movies, and that's because it is easily one of the most stunning movies I've seen in recent memory, 3,000 Years of Longing. Now, this is from director George Miller, who's most famous for doing the Mad Max movies, and this is nothing like Mad Max. It's a romantic movie, and it's very much about romance and love. But aside from just looking good, the reason it actually makes the list is because you've got Idris Elba playing a djinn, or a genie, and instead of just granting Tilda Swinton's wishes, he actually tells these long, epic tales of how he became incarcerated in various bottles over the course of 3,000 years. And all of that storytelling is done in this insanely beautiful style. But aside from all the key romance themes, this movie really does take you on a journey to some beautiful and amazing places. Speaking of exotic and faraway lands, I personally have always wanted to learn a second language, which is where today's sponsor, Babbel, comes in. I am currently using Babbel to learn Spanish. It's something I've wanted to do for quite a while. I've thought about it for at least